Thank you. Nice to be here. For many of you, this is the second or third time, so I'll try and spice things up. And on the, do we have slides? I mean, I know we do, but what I want to do is talk a little bit and drop some controversial ideas on you, and then open up the floor and have a general free-ranging discussion. So I don't know who's running the mic. I guess if you want to interject, put your hand up and we'll get the mic to you as rapidly as possible. So my name's Justin. I wrote the book The Machine. Anyone read The Machine? Oh gosh, more than half of you. And I started Ballistics about 27 years ago. We implement the principles in The Machine, and our expertise or our whole experience has been working with fast growth organizations, either typically industrial. So either organizations that have an executive team that for some reason wants to grow aggressively, or increasingly organizations that have been purchased in full or in part by private equity, meaning that the senior executive team has no choice, if they value their jobs, but to grow aggressively. And the ideas that I want to drop on you is how we think about growth first, and secondly, the specific things that we do in organizations to cause them to grow aggressively. And by aggressively, for a $50 to $100 million business, which would be the space where we would typically work, 20% year-on-year growth or better is what I would think of as aggressive. So I want to start with the controversial. This is not a trick question. So give me the obvious answer. It's probably the answer that I'm looking for. What department should be responsible for revenue? Sales is the obvious answer, right? The common answer. Is it the correct answer? Which department do you think should be responsible for revenue? If it's health and safety? Okay. Okay. So my contention is that operations should be responsible for revenue, not sales. But that's not the controversial bit. The controversial bit is that I'm going to claim that it's obvious that sales should not be responsible for revenue and that operations should. It's obvious. All you have to do is open your eyes and look around. So what I want to do is open your eyes for you and point you to a couple of observations that I think will make it obvious to you that operations, not sales, should be responsible for revenue. And there's two reasons why I want to do that. One is because it's entertaining and you just had lunch, so it'll help you fight the desire to fall asleep. The other reason why I want to do it is because in recognizing that operations, not sales, should be responsible for revenue, you're going to realize that there's a whole bunch of default assumptions that you've made about how your organization should be designed and how it should be managed that are wrong and that need to be rethought. So if you buy into my line of reasoning, which I suspect most of you are going to, that operations should be responsible for revenue, you will end up recognizing that there are some significant changes that need to be made to the structure of your organization and to the metrics that you use to evaluate the performance of your organization on a day-to-day basis. So without further ado, let me point you to those two observations, and you can confirm for yourself whether the ballet dancer is correct or incorrect. So the first observation is that in most businesses, not all, but most businesses, in any reporting period, most revenue comes from existing customers repurchasing. Who would agree that that is true for most businesses? Is there anyone here who works for a business for which it is actually true for, your business? Okay. Now, if you point salespeople to this observation, they will say in their own defense, well, we manage those accounts. Their inference is that they're responsible for the retention of that revenue. So the question we should ask next is, are they? And it turns out it's fairly easy to validate that claim. All we have to do is look at the reasons why customers leave. So if we take stock of the customers that defect during that same reporting period and start spending money with your competitors rather than spending money with you, and ask them, why did you leave? It turns out that in most organizations, you get roughly the same answers in roughly the same sequence. And the top 3 reasons why customers defect are, in order of occurrence, frequency. Number 1, we're not happy with the operational performance of the organization, which basically boils down to poor on-time delivery performance in most. Now, you might say we're a services business. There's no such thing as delivery performance. Of course, there's such a thing as delivery performance. Did you complete the project on time? The second reason is pricing. Sorry, you're just too expensive. And the third reason is the product. The customer preferred somebody else's product, either because they weren't happy with the attributes of your product, or because in the case of a multi-line vendor, they weren't happy with the range of products on offer. So they're the top 3 reasons, at least that's my contention, the top 3 reasons why customers defect for most businesses. Who agrees that that's true for most businesses? Okay. So if we think about those 2 observations in conjunction with one another, we're forced to conclude that salespeople are not directly responsible for winning most of the revenue that you bank in any given reporting period, and they're also not directly responsible for the retention of it. Because your operations team, not your sales team, is a team that has direct responsibility for your operational performance, for pricing, and for product. And if you have put your sales team in charge of operational performance, pricing, and product, then you have a set of problems that are far too large for us to grapple with this afternoon. So that raises a couple of interesting questions. What are the implications for operations if operations should be taking responsibility for revenue? And the second question is, well, if sales is not responsible for revenue, what should sales be responsible for? So let's tackle the first question first. If operations takes responsibility for revenue, that means that your operations department has to be responsible for maintaining existing customers' spend from reporting period to reporting period. But I'd go one step further. I would suggest that your operations department should be responsible not just for the retention of accounts, but your operations department should be responsible for the incremental growth of existing accounts, not sales. And here's why. You have grocery stores over here. What is it? Sainsbury's? What do you call what's a grocery store called in the UK? Tesco, yeah. So if you go to Tesco, this is a thought experiment. If you go to Tesco, maybe you haven't shopped there before, and you go to the fruit and vegetable section and you try the carrots and you take them home and you discover that the Tesco carrots are truly delicious. It's likely that you'll go back and purchase those carrots repeatedly. And it's also likely that of your own volition, you will experiment with Brussels sprouts, with beans, and with other members of the produce category. It would be unnecessary for Tesco to have to deploy a salesperson to convince you, once you were sold on carrots, that you should try Brussels sprouts. Fair call? If Tesco wanted to invest sales resources in you, it might make sense to encourage you to try the meat and fish section of the meat and fish section of the store. But it would be wasteful for them to try and convince you to buy Brussels sprouts, because you will come to purchase Brussels sprouts of your own volition. So if you want your customers to purchase things from within categories in which they are already making purchases, the key to achieving that is to do a spectacular job of delivering that which they are currently purchasing. It would be wasteful to have salespeople go back to tap your existing customers on the shoulder and to explain to them that if they like carrots, maybe they would like Brussels sprouts also, because they're not dumb, they can figure that out for themselves. So operations should be held accountable not just for the retention of revenue, but the incremental growth of revenue. Sales. If sales is not responsible for revenue, if sales is not even responsible for the incremental growth in revenue, then what on earth could sales possibly be held accountable for? What do you think?
Sales out of category, revenue out of category.
New business. So new business would fall into two parts. There would be new business that would consist of going to existing customers and convincing them to buy more categories than they're currently purchasing. And the other half would be new customers. Now, in both cases, what you're actually doing is taking business away from your competitors. And that, I believe, should be the sole responsibility of your salespeople, to take business away from your competitors. And that business exists in two forms. Existing customers of yours who are also your competitors' customers, and non-customers of yours who are obviously also your competitors' customers. Now, some of you at this point will be starting to think, well, this is a distinction without a difference. Doesn't new business equal revenue? Kind of. The problem is, if we measure new business by counting the revenue received from new business during any reporting period, what ends up happening is we grossly undervalue that new business. I told not everyone's going to agree. And if we grossly undervalue new business, what's likely to happen is we're likely to underinvest in new business. And most organizations that we work with underinvest in new businesses. They grossly underestimate their allowable acquisition cost. And consequently, they don't grow as rapidly as they should be. So I want you to think of new business as an annuity. When we're talking about revenue, we're talking about the sum of transactions during a particular reporting period. But when we value an annuity, what we're talking about is the sum of all of the transactions that will occur over the life of a relationship with a contract or with a customer. Now, obviously, if we want to value an annuity, we're going to sum up the payments and discount the sum for both uncertainty and for inflation. But we're going to end up with a number, most likely, that is an order of magnitude more significant than the bookings in any one reporting period. So a mortgage is a good example. To a banker, an example of an annuity is a mortgage, right? An annuity just means a stream of future payments. So if you buy a house for £1 million, what's the value to the bank, do you think, of that piece of paper? The mortgage contract. Well, let me go back one step. What's the annual payment on that piece of paper? You buy a house for £1 million, what's the mortgage payment? 30 grand? A month?
30 grand over the year.
Oh, a year. I was thinking a month. Mortgages are expensive here. I don't know what interest rate that is. Okay. So $30,000 a year in receipts. £30,000 a year in receipts. And what's the value of the contract to the bank?
25 times that.
25 times the annual receipts.
30 plus the original sum back.
Yeah, so let's continue with the banking analog. If you sold mortgages for a living and you employed salespeople, would you expect salespeople to go door to door after they sold a mortgage and collect payments? No? Do you know why you wouldn't expect them to do that? Because that would be idiotic. It turns out that if you look at the history of banking, there was a point in time where if you sold a mortgage to a customer and you worked for a financial institution, you would be responsible for going door to door and collecting payments. But banks figured out that that was idiotic years ago and put an end to that practice. So today, the way that the mortgage industry works is if you sell a mortgage, you hand it off to the operations team to manage, and you go looking to sell another mortgage. Think of which model you have operating within your sales department currently. Do salespeople go to market, win an annuity, either a new account or a new category of business for an existing account, and then hand it off to operations to manage? Or does your sales department go door to door collecting payments thereafter? Are you quiet because you don't know the answer, or because you're shocked by what the answer actually is and you're trying to sit there stony-faced and be British? What do you think? What's the model that you're operating in your sales department? Are salespeople responsible for winning new annuities? Yes. Are they also responsible for servicing them? Really? Salespeople don't own accounts? Who here, if I went to your salespeople and asked them for a list of their accounts, how many of you have salespeople who could actually furnish me a list of accounts? Can I see a show of hands? Okay. So those salespeople are in the mortgage management business, or the annuity management business. And obviously, if you make a salesperson responsible for managing an annuity that they have won, what is the cost of that? Every hour of their time that's dedicated to the management of an annuity that they won in some past period is an hour of their time that is not dedicated to the pursuit of new business. So if you want to grow your organization aggressively, the key to doing this, in principle at least, is extraordinarily simple. All you need to do is configure your organization so that your salespeople can focus exclusively on winning new annuities and tossing them over the fence to your operations department to process. In other words, copy exactly the mortgage model. That's all you have to do to grow your business aggressively. Any questions on that before we talk about the practical implications of that change?
I've got a question.
Mm-hmm.
The salespeople build a relationship with that new customer, and some of them want to retain that relationship for the renewal.
Yes.
But that doesn't fit within the model that you're talking about.
So what's wrong with your product that makes it necessary for a salesperson to maintain a relationship with the customer in order for the customer to renew?
Oh no, I didn't say it was the right thing, but I just know that a lot of salespeople like to retain.
Okay, so if what salespeople like is top of mind for you, then the question, the deeper question that you need to ask yourself is, who works for whom? Because for most of the people in the room, they at least like to try and convince themselves that their sales team works for them. If you work for your sales team, then you have an even bigger problem. I know that's not the case. You wouldn't have had the level of success that you had if you worked for your sales team. Okay, so I don't have a lot of interest in what salespeople like. Salespeople like all sorts of irrational things, but that shouldn't determine the architecture of your business, surely, particularly not if you want to grow your business aggressively. Okay, so let's talk about practically what we're going to do about this new way of thinking about responsibilities. If we go into an organization and we're charged with a mandate to drive growth in that organization, practically there are 3 directives that we bring to the organization. And we wouldn't start work in an organization unless the senior executive team from the organization gave us the thumbs up with respect to these 3 directives. If we can't execute these 3 directives, we don't have a mandate, and if we don't have a mandate, we're not going to take responsibility for doing work inside that organization. So here are the 3 directives. The first is that we need to restructure the organization so that salespeople sell and nothing else. But it's important that you understand what I mean by sell. There are sort of 2 tangents along which the definition of sell is very important. The first is that by sell I mean have selling conversations. So a selling conversation is the value-adding activity performed by a salesperson. If you were an industrial organization and you had welders on your shop floor, the value-adding activity performed by a welder is not surprisingly welding. And in many cases, the value-adding activity performed by a person is expressed in the name of the role. If you employ someone who's a brain surgeon, it's fairly obvious what is a specific value-adding activity that person performs. But in the case of a salesperson, it's not obvious, so we need to figure it out explicitly. And my contention is the value-adding activity that a salesperson performs is a thing called a selling conversation. where a salesperson interacts with a prospective customer in an effort to get them to change their behavior. So we're talking about salespeople performing only selling conversations, and only conversation and a conversation only qualifies as a selling conversation if it's performed in pursuit of new business, meaning new categories of business for existing customers and new accounts. If a salesperson is having a conversation that is not in pursuit of new business, it's not a selling conversation, and we don't want salespeople doing it. So we want the organization to have a small number of salespeople, and we want those salespeople to do absolutely nothing other than have selling conversations all day, every day. That means all of the activities that salespeople were performing prior to this either need to be performed by someone else in the organization, which practically means operations or perhaps marketing, or those activities need to be discarded altogether. So that's directive number one. Directive number two is we need to move almost all, practically all, sales activities inside. So what we do is we look at all of the sales and sales-related activities that are performed in the field currently, and for each activity we ask ourselves, does this activity absolutely have to be performed face-to-face in front of customers? And if the answer is no, it does not absolutely have to be performed face-to-face in front of customers, we move it inside. And in almost every organizations, including organizations, or particularly in organizations that sell big accounts, like $1 million in size or bigger, or complex deals where there's teams of engineers involved in decision-making, in almost all of those cases, almost all of the critical selling conversations occur inside already. When we work with semi-technical organizations, however, we have this chorus of objections from salespeople who claim that because of the technical nature of what they sell, it needs to be done face-to-face, which is, as you like to say here in the UK, bollocks. I watch some British TV. Now, there are some activities that genuinely need to be performed face-to-face. Most of them are technical activities. Who should be performing technical activities? Technical people, not salespeople. So technical activities would be things like demonstrations and detailed requirement discovery. Neither your engineering teams nor your customers, if they had a choice, would favor a salesperson coming to do a demo or to do detailed requirement discovery over, say, an application engineer. If there's one thing that your customers' engineers are your customer engineers are really, really good at, it's telling the difference between a genuine engineer and a salesperson pretending to be an engineer. So for all of those sales-related activities that are technical in nature, all we have to do is have them performed by proper engineers as opposed to pretend engineers. Now, if we look at the remaining activities that are being performed face-to-face currently, in most cases, they don't need to be performed face-to-face, so we can bring them inside. On the rare occasions that we discover true selling conversations that need to be performed face-to-face, our suggestion is you need to throw significantly more resources at those conversations than you do currently. So practically, we would expect your general sales team to come inside and stay inside. But if once or twice a month, there's a genuine requirement for a selling conversation to occur face-to-face, we would rather you send a specialist enterprise salesperson, and if you're not doing more than $50 million a year in sales, meaning you can't afford a specialist enterprise salesperson, then send the CEO. And don't send the CEO unaccompanied, send the CEO with an application engineer and maybe a project manager. And don't just send them for a 90-minute coffee at Starbucks, send them to spend a day or even 2 days on the client's premises. Because if that meeting is important enough to warrant someone needing to be face-to-face in order to have a commercial conversation, you really should have a team of people, senior people, descending on that organization for a sensible period of time and occupying that organization's boardroom. Everything else, move inside. That's directive number 2. Directive number 3 is very simple. Get rid of salespeople's autonomy, and along with salespeople's autonomy, get rid of commissions. Now, there are 2 reasons why I would counsel you to get rid of commissions. One reason is that I might think that eliminating commissions will cause sales to improve. And that's correct. I do think that getting rid of commissions will cause sales to improve, and that's what I've seen over and over again, and many of you in the room have seen that too, but that's not why getting rid of commissions is on this list here. The reason getting rid of salespeople's autonomy and therefore commissions is on this list is because it turns out that unless you get rid of salespeople's autonomy and commissions, you can't execute on the first two directives on the list there. Imagine if you gathered your salespeople together under the standard terms or under the current terms of your engagement with them, and you explained these first 2 points. If you explained to them, look, if we restructured the organization so that you did nothing but selling conversations in pursuit of new business all day, every day, 5 days a week, 15 selling conversations a day, your salespeople would say, yes, that sounds like a sensible idea. If we said to your salespeople, look, you don't need to be in the field. On the rare occasions that there's a genuine requirement for a face-to-face commercial discussion, we're going to send the CEO. They would agree that, in the abstract at least, that idea makes sense too. But after you got their philosophical agreement to both of these points, they're going to go back into the field tomorrow and do what? Exactly what they did yesterday. You might gaze at yourself in the mirror of a morning when you're applying makeup or shaving or both, and draw the conclusion that you're a master of all that you survey, but you're not the master of your salespeople. Not if you structured their engagement with your organization such that they believe they're autonomous, and if you're paying them commission, then you're underlining their autonomy every single week or every single month with their paycheck. So we get rid of salespeople's autonomy, we say welcome to the team, and we pay salespeople their market value. If it makes sense for you to have someone in your organization who earns £250,000 a year, then you should pay them £250,000 a year in the form of salary. And you should make it clear to them the level of productivity that they need to consistently perform at in order to justify a $250,000 a year salary. And you should measure them carefully to ensure that they perform at that level, and if they don't, then they shouldn't work for your organization anymore. So you should engage your sales team exactly how you engage everyone else in your organization. You should choose the type of person, the caliber of individual, the list of capabilities that are required. You should estimate the market value of those individuals, and then you should pay those people their market value, if not a little bit more. And you should build an environment that causes your sales team to function in a way that grows your organization at the rate at which your owners would like it to be grown. And that's your job as management.